The mysterious groom. Zira stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the golden veil over her head. The soft glow of the dressing room lights made her emerald green skin shimmer. Her hands trembled slightly as she fixed the delicate jewelry on her forehead. Today was her wedding day, but her heart was heavy with doubt. She had never met her groom, Daniel Carter. Their marriage had been arranged by the Intergalactic Union, a treaty between Earth and her home planet, Eridani Prime. It was supposed to bring peace between the two worlds, but Zira wasn't sure if peace was worth marrying a stranger. A soft knock came at the door. "It's time," said her best friend, Lyrian. Zira took a deep breath and stepped out of the room. The wedding that felt wrong. The grand hall was decorated with golden banners and glowing lanterns. Humans and aliens sat together, watching as Zira walked down the aisle. The moment she saw Daniel, a strange feeling twisted in her chest. He was tall, with sharp features and deep blue eyes that seemed to glow faintly. His black hair was neatly combed, and his suit was perfect, too perfect. His smile was polite, but there was something unnatural about him. As Zira reached the altar, Daniel extended his hand. His skin was warm, but his touch felt controlled. Not stiff, not robotic, but like someone pretending to be normal. Zira's heart pounded. Something was wrong with this man. The priest began the ceremony. Zira's mind screamed for her to stop, to ask who Daniel really was, but it was too late. "I do," Daniel said in a steady voice. Zira hesitated but finally whispered, "I do." The moment the words left her lips, Daniel's fingers tightened around hers for a fraction of a second. Too strong, almost crushing. Then he let go, smiling as if nothing had happened. The guests cheered. The union between Earth and Eridani was sealed. But Zira felt like she had just made a terrible mistake. The night of secrets. Later that night, Zira sat on the edge of their shared bed, her heart still racing. She had noticed strange things about Daniel throughout the wedding. His breathing was too slow, too controlled. His smile never wavered, not once. His footsteps made almost no sound. His body was warm, but his pulse was faint. Was he sick? Was he nervous? Or was he hiding something? Daniel entered the room, his footsteps eerily silent. He removed his jacket with precise movements. "You are quiet," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, but lacked emotion. I'm just tired," Zira lied. Daniel nodded. "Then rest." He turned off the lights and lay down beside her. Zira closed her eyes but couldn't sleep. A strange humming sound filled the room, soft but present. She held her breath and listened carefully. It was coming from Daniel, like a faint mechanical vibration. Zira slowly turned to face him, but his side of the bed was empty. Her breath caught in her throat. The room was dark, but she could see a faint blue glow near the bathroom door. Daniel was standing there, completely still. The glow wasn't coming from a device. It was coming from his body. Then, without warning, he vanished. The forbidden room. Zira gasped and sat up. Where did he go? She slid out of bed, careful not to make a sound. Her heart pounded as she crept toward the door. The house was silent, except for the soft humming noise coming from somewhere below. She followed the sound down the hallway. At the end, a door she hadn't noticed before was slightly open. A faint blue light flickered inside. Zira pushed the door open and stepped in. Her blood turned to ice. Daniel was floating in midair, surrounded by strange holographic symbols that flickered around him. His skin shimmered between human and something else, something alien. His veins pulsed with electric blue light. Zira covered her mouth to stop herself from screaming. What was she looking at? Who or what had she just married? Then, as if sensing her presence, Daniel's glowing eyes snapped open and locked onto hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice that sounded almost inhuman, Daniel whispered, "You weren't supposed to see this." The forbidden room. Zira's heart pounded like a war drum. The blue glow from Daniel's body bathed the room in an eerie light. He hovered a few inches above the ground, surrounded by shifting, holographic symbols that flickered like dying stars. His veins pulsed with an unearthly energy, his skin rippling between human and something else, something not of this world. She had seen many alien species before, but nothing like this. Daniel's glowing eyes snapped open. "You weren't supposed to see this," he whispered, his voice layered with something unnatural. Zira froze, gripping the doorframe for support. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body refused to move. "What are you?" she finally forced out, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel exhaled slowly. The blue energy around him dimmed, and his body lowered gently to the floor. Within seconds, the glow faded, his skin settling back into its human form. The symbols in the air flickered one last time before vanishing into darkness. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then, Daniel took a step toward her. Zira flinched. "Please," he said softly, raising his hands as if calming a frightened animal. "Don't be afraid." Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. "Don't be afraid." She had just discovered her husband, an Earth-born human, was not entirely human at all. "I need answers," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "Now." Daniel looked away. His jaw tensed. Then, with a sigh, he turned to the wall and pressed his hand against a hidden panel. A section of the wall dissolved, revealing a hidden control interface. A stream of holographic data appeared, displaying symbols Zira didn't recognize. "I'm not who they told you I was," Daniel admitted, his voice heavy. "And if you stay with me, you won't be safe. A secret that could end everything." Zira crossed her arms. "You're going to have to do better than that." Daniel hesitated, then ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Fine. You want the truth." He turned back to the holographic display, tapping a few symbols. Instantly, the image of a laboratory appeared, filled with sterile white lights and containment pods. Inside those pods were people, or at least, they looked human. Zira's blood ran cold. "What is this?" Daniel's face was grim. "This is where I was born." She turned to him, eyes wide. "What?" "I wasn't born naturally," he said. "I was created." Zira took a step back, struggling to process his words. "I was part of a secret experiment, Project Genesis. The goal was to create the perfect hybrid, a human genetically engineered using an unknown alien DNA sample discovered decades ago. I am the only one who survived." Zira shook her head. "But that's impossible. No human-alien hybrid has ever been stable." "I wasn't supposed to be stable," Daniel said darkly. "They wanted me as a weapon." The weapon that escaped. Daniel clenched his fists. "I grew up inside that lab, trained like a soldier before I could even understand what war was. The scientists wanted to see if I could be controlled, but I wasn't a machine. I started to question them. To feel." He exhaled sharply, his eyes distant. "Then I found out the truth. My body wasn't just a genetic experiment. It was a ticking time bomb. The alien DNA inside me is unstable. They didn't create me to live a normal life. They created me to burn bright, and then self-destruct." Zira's stomach twisted. "And you escaped?" Daniel nodded. "I ran. I've been hiding ever since." Zira shook her head. "And you thought marrying an alien would keep you safe?" Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "It wasn't just about safety. I thought maybe if I could live like a real person, I could change my fate." Zira stared at him. The man she had married, the man she thought was human, wasn't just an alien hybrid. He was a living experiment, a weapon running from its creators. And now, she was caught in the middle. "The hunters have arrived." A sudden alarm blared through the room. The holographic display glitched, flashing red warning signals. Daniel's face went pale. "No," he whispered. "They found me." Zira's heart skipped a beat. Who? Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he rushed to the control panel, scanning the incoming data. Military-grade tracking system. Someone activated a trace signal when I used the interface. His voice was cold. They know where we are. Zira's pulse raced. We need to leave. Now. Daniel grabbed her wrist, his grip firm but desperate. Listen to me. If they catch me, they won't just kill me. They'll use me. And if they do, nothing will be able to stop them. Before Zira could respond, the entire house shook with a powerful explosion. A second later, the front door burst open, and black armored soldiers stormed inside. Zira's mind screamed Ruyun. Daniel's eyes flashed bright blue. Stay behind me, he said in a voice no longer fully human. Then, as the soldiers raised their weapons, Daniel's body exploded with power, a blinding surge of blue light that sent shockwaves through the entire building. The battle for survival had begun. The secret truth about Daniel. The house shook violently as explosions ripped through the walls. Smoke and debris filled the air. The black armored soldiers stormed in, weapons raised, their red visor lights glowing in the darkness like the eyes of predators. Zira's breath hitched as she instinctively took a step back. This wasn't just an attack. It was a capture mission. They weren't here to kill Daniel. They were here to take him alive. But Daniel wasn't going down without a fight. His veins pulsed with blue energy, his irises glowing like the heart of a dying star. The air around him crackled with raw power. For the first time, Zira saw what he truly was, something beyond human, beyond alien, a creation that shouldn't exist. The first soldier lunged forward. Daniel moved faster than the eye could follow. His fist struck the soldier's chest, sending him crashing through the wall like a ragdoll. The other soldiers hesitated. Daniel turned his head toward them, his glowing eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice layered with something not entirely human. The remaining soldiers opened fire. Zira dived for cover as plasma bolts scorched through the air, but Daniel didn't dodge. Instead, his body absorbed the energy blasts. The blue veins beneath his skin brightened, as if the attacks were fueling him instead of hurting him. Then he unleashed his power. A shockwave of pure energy erupted from his body, sending soldiers flying. The walls buckled, the ceiling cracked, and the entire house groaned under the pressure. For a moment, there was silence. Smoke and dust settled. The soldiers lay motionless on the ground. Some groaned in pain, others didn't move at all. Daniel exhaled slowly, his glow fading. He turned to Zira, his expression unreadable. "We have to go," he said. Zira didn't argue. Whatever Daniel was, whatever he had become, the truth could wait. Right now, they needed to escape into the unknown. They ran. Zira followed Daniel through the burning house, dodging falling debris and broken furniture. Outside, the night was eerily silent. The city skyline in the distance was untouched, unaware of the chaos that had just unfolded. A small black ship hovered in the alleyway, a sleek stealth craft. Daniel rushed toward it, pressing his palm against the side. The ship responded instantly, its engines humming to life. "Get in," he ordered. Zira hesitated for only a second before climbing inside. The cockpit was compact, built for speed rather than comfort. As soon as she settled in, Daniel took the pilot's seat, fingers flying across the controls. The ship lifted off, shooting into the sky just as more military vehicles arrived below. Plasma shots fired from the ground, missing them by inches. Daniel pushed the engines to their limit, weaving through the air like a phantom. Zira's heart pounded. "Where are we going?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Somewhere they can't follow." She turned to look at him. Really look at him. His hands gripped the controls with inhuman precision. His face, though still human, seemed more focused, more calculated than before. The blue glow in his veins had faded, but she could still sense it. the power lurking beneath his skin, waiting to be unleashed again. And now, she had no choice but to face the truth. The truth about Daniel. Once they reached the outskirts of Earth's atmosphere, Daniel set the ship to autopilot and turned to face her. "You wanted answers," he said. "Now, you're going to get them." Zira swallowed hard. "Start from the beginning." Daniel leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I told you I was created in a lab, but I didn't tell you the worst part." Zira's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then said, "I'm dying." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What?" she whispered. Daniel's expression darkened. "The alien DNA inside me, it's unstable. It was never meant to last forever. My body is breaking down, slowly but surely. I don't know how much time I have left." Zira shook her head. "That's not possible. There has to be a way to fix it." Daniel looked away. "There might be, but I'd have to go back to the people who created me." Silence filled the cockpit. For the first time, Zira saw something in Daniel's eyes she hadn't noticed before. Not of the soldiers chasing them, not of dying, but of becoming something he couldn't control. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice softer now. Daniel sighed. "Because I didn't want you to look at me the way you're looking at me now." Zira felt a lump form in her throat. She had started this marriage as nothing more than a political arrangement. But now she wasn't just married to a stranger. She was married to a man who was never meant to exist. And she had no idea what that meant for either of them. The final revelation. The ship's alarms suddenly blared. Daniel snapped his head up. "They've locked onto us." Zira's pulse spiked. "Who?" Daniel's fingers flew over the controls. Not soldiers. Worse. A massive battleship uncloaked before them. Its sleek black hull was covered in glowing red insignias. Zira's stomach dropped. She knew that symbol. "The Black Horizon," she whispered. Daniel clenched his jaw. "Yeah, and if they're here, it means we're out of time." Zira's hands trembled. The Black Horizon wasn't military. They weren't from Earth. They were mercenaries, bounty hunters that worked for the highest bidder. And if they were here, it meant only one thing. Someone had put a price on Daniel's head. The ship's comms crackled to life. A deep, gravelly voice filled the cockpit. "Project Genesis, you belong to us." Daniel exhaled slowly. Not today. He slammed a button, and the ship pitched downward, heading toward the nearest jump point. But before they could escape, a powerful tractor beam locked onto them. Zira gritted her teeth. "What now?" Daniel glanced at her, his eyes glowing once more. "Now," he said, "we fight." The hunters arrive. The ship trembled as the tractor beam locked onto them. The Black Horizon's massive battleship loomed in front of them like a hungry predator. Its hull was jet black, lined with pulsing red energy that crackled through the void. Inside the cockpit, warning alarms blared. Red lights flashed. Daniel's grip on the controls tightened. His glowing blue eyes darted across the ship's interface, searching for an opening. A way out. But there wasn't one. Zira felt her pulse racing. "They've got us," she said. "What do we do?" Daniel exhaled sharply. "I have a plan." She narrowed her eyes. "Tell me it doesn't involve getting killed." No promises. Before she could protest, Daniel slammed his fist onto a panel. A hidden compartment slid open, revealing a sleek, silver injector device filled with a glowing blue liquid. Zira's stomach dropped. "What is that?" she asked. Daniel gave her a hard look. "It's a stabilizer. Temporary. Gives me full access to my abilities. But..." He hesitated. "But what?" He clenched his jaw. "If I use it too much, my body won't recover. I'll burn out." Zira grabbed his wrist. "Then don't use it." Daniel's expression was unreadable. "It's either this, or we both die." She wanted to argue, to tell him there had to be another way. But then the ship lurched. The tractor beam dragged them in closer. Daniel didn't wait. He stabbed the injector into his neck. For a second, nothing happened. Then his veins ignited with blue fire. Zura stepped back as Daniel gritted his teeth, his muscles tensing. The glow under his skin pulsed violently, spreading across his body like a living storm. The air around him seemed to distort, as if space itself was bending under his power. He exhaled sharply. His eyes snapped to Zura. They weren't just glowing. They were burning. "Stay behind me," he said. Before Zura could react, the Black Horizon's boarding ramp slammed open, and then the hunters stepped inside. The shadow soldiers. The first one was massive, 7 feet tall, clad in reinforced black armor with a glowing red skull insignia on his chest. His helmet had no faceplate, only a dark visor that pulsed like an artificial eye. The second was smaller, faster-looking, with sleek exoskeletal plating and dual wrist-mounted plasma blades. She moved like a predator, her head tilting slightly as if analyzing them. The last one was different. He didn't wear armor. Instead, he was dressed in a black, high-collared uniform, his hands clasped behind his back. His silver hair was slicked back, and his piercing yellow eyes locked onto Daniel with unsettling calmness. "Project Genesis," he said smoothly. "You will come with us." Daniel cracked his knuckles. The ship trembled slightly under the pressure of his growing energy. "Not gonna happen," he said. The silver-haired man tilted his head. "We were instructed to take you alive." He sighed. "But if you resist, we are authorized to remove all unnecessary obstacles." His gaze flickered toward Zura. Daniel's entire body pulsed with rage. "If you touch her," he growled, "I will tear this entire ship apart." The man smirked. "I was hoping you'd say that." Then he snapped his fingers. The armored warrior charged. The fight for survival. The moment the massive hunter lunged, Daniel vanished. Zura barely had time to process it before Daniel reappeared behind the attacker, his movements impossibly fast. His fist collided with the hunter's helmet, sending a shockwave through the ship. The force was so strong it sent the massive warrior crashing through 3 walls. But before Daniel could recover, the female assassin was on him. She twisted in midair, plasma blades slicing through the space where Daniel had just been. He barely dodged, her blades grazing his side, leaving a smoking wound. Daniel gritted his teeth and retaliated, his hand glowing with concentrated energy. He swung. A shockwave exploded from his palm, sending the assassin skidding backward. Zura's eyes widened. Daniel wasn't just fighting, he was evolving. He was moving too fast, hitting too hard, reacting as if he knew their moves before they made them. But then, the silver-haired man finally moved, and everything changed. The unstoppable force. Without warning, Daniel froze mid-motion. His entire body locked up, as if he had been paralyzed from the inside out. The blue glow flickered dangerously in his veins. Zura's breath caught. What's happening to him? The silver-haired man walked forward, his expression calm. He raised a single hand, and Daniel dropped to his knees, gasping. "You still don't understand, do you?" The man said. "You were never free. You were designed to obey." Daniel gritted his teeth, struggling against the invisible force holding him down. His entire body trembled. "No, I'm not yours." The man chuckled. "You still think you have control over your own body." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small metallic device, a black insignia with glowing red circuits. Zura's heart stopped. It was a command override chip. She had seen them before, a last resort control mechanism, used on experimental life forms. The silver-haired man pressed a button. Daniel screamed. His entire body convulsed as the blue energy in his veins flared violently, then began to shatter. Zura's eyes widened in horror. They were shutting him down. Daniel collapsed, his body twitching, his breath ragged. The man knelt beside him, speaking softly. "You were never meant to escape, Project Genesis." Daniel's glowing eyes flickered weakly. Zura clenched her fists, her heart pounding. She had spent her entire life avoiding war, avoiding conflict. But in that moment, she knew what she had to do. She reached behind her back and pulled out a concealed plasma dagger. The silver-haired man turned toward her, an amused look in his yellow eyes. Zira lunged, and then everything went black. Escape to the alien world. Darkness. Zira's mind swam in a void of nothingness, her thoughts sluggish, her body unmoving. A faint humming sound echoed in the distance, mechanical and rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat. Then, pain. A sudden shock rippled through her body, forcing her eyes open. Blinding white lights greeted her, sterile and cold. The air smelled of metal and something acrid, something wrong. She was in a containment cell. Memory crashed back into her. The fight. Daniel collapsing under the control chip. The silver-haired man. The dagger in her hand, her desperate attack. And then, nothing. She struggled to move, but her wrists and ankles were bound by glowing restraints, pulsing red with energy. Suppression cuffs. They weren't just physical restraints. They were dampening her neural energy. A voice crackled through the intercom. "She's awake." Zira gritted her teeth. Where was Daniel? A door hissed open, and a familiar figure entered. The silver-haired commander. His golden eyes gleamed under the harsh lights, his posture annoyingly calm. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," he said smoothly. Zira glared at him. "Where is he?" The man smirked, stepping closer. "Your husband." "Oh, he's exactly where he belongs." The wall suddenly flickered, revealing a transparent holographic window. And Zira's blood turned to ice. Project Genesis, the final phase. Daniel was strapped onto an operating table, surrounded by high-tech machinery. His arms and legs were held down by reinforced restraints, and a massive circuit-like device was latched onto his chest. His veins, once glowing with blue energy, were now dim, flickering weakly. And his eyes were open. But he wasn't there. He was staring blankly at the ceiling, completely unresponsive. Zira's stomach twisted in horror. "What have you done to him?" The silver-haired commander tilted his head. "We are merely restoring order." "Restoring order." Zira's voice trembled with rage. "He's not your machine to control." The man chuckled. "Oh, but he is. He was never designed for free will. His genetic makeup is unstable, constantly deteriorating. Without control, he's a ticking time bomb. If left unchecked, his energy will collapse and take everything around him with it." Zira's hands shook in her restraints. They weren't just capturing Daniel. They were reprogramming him, turning him back into a weapon. She clenched her fists. "I won't let you do this." The commander sighed, almost bored. "And what exactly do you plan to do, dear princess?" He gestured to her restraints. "You are powerless." Zira took a deep breath. Then she smirked. "Funny. That's what everyone says before they lose." The commander frowned. And then, the alarms blared. The Eridani rescue team. The entire ship shuddered as an explosion rocked the outer hull. The red suppression cuffs around Zira's wrists flickered, their power momentarily disrupted. Her pulse spiked. She wasted no time. Zira wrenched her arms free, ignoring the searing pain. In a blur of movement, she grabbed the stun rod from the belt of the nearest guard and slammed it into his ribs. The guard convulsed and collapsed instantly. The silver-haired commander's eyes widened, just as the hull breach alarm blared louder. Through the holographic window, Zira saw them. A fleet of Eridani warships had broken through the Black Horizon's defenses. Fighter crafts zipped through the darkness, firing plasma torpedoes at the mercenary vessel. They had come for her. The commander scowled. "Tetch, annoying pests." Zira didn't give him time to react. She grabbed a fallen plasma pistol and fired. The blast struck the control panel next to Daniel's operating table, overloading the system. Sparks flew. The glowing circuits shattered, the energy bindings failing one by one. Daniel's body jerked violently, his chest heaving as the forced reprogramming collapsed. His glowing blue eyes snapped open. For a moment, the room fell into silence. Then Daniel tore through his restraints like they were paper. Daniel unleashed. The commander took a step back. "Oh, that's unfortunate." Daniel sat up, blinking in confusion. Then he saw Zira. His expression changed instantly, eyes sharp, breath heavy, hands clenched. His veins pulsed with that blue energy, brighter than ever before. The commander raised a small device. "Stand down, Project Genesis." Daniel tilted his head slightly. Then, in a single movement, he ripped the device from the commander's hands and crushed it into dust. The man barely had time to react before Daniel's fist slammed into his chest, sending him flying across the room. Zira ran to Daniel, breathless. "Can you move?" He looked at her, and for the first time since the capture, he actually smiled. "Let's get out of here." Escape to Eridani Prime. They ran through the chaotic halls of the Black Horizon battleship, dodging fire from mercenary soldiers. Plasma bolts sizzled past them, but Daniel's reactions were faster than light, his body moving instinctively, dodging, blocking, striking back. Zira led him to an emergency airlock, where a sleek Eridani fighter was waiting. The pilot, a tall, golden-skinned alien with sharp eyes, waved them in. "Zira, get in, now." Daniel helped her inside before jumping in after her. The moment they were strapped in, the Eridani ship blasted off, narrowly escaping the collapsing enemy battleship. Zira watched from the window as the Black Horizon vessel vanished into the darkness. They were finally free. Or so she thought. Daniel leaned back against his seat, exhaling. But his hands trembled slightly. His glow, though steady, seemed too intense. Zira frowned. "Daniel?" He looked at her, and for a moment, she saw something haunting in his gaze. Then he whispered, "Something's wrong." Her chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Daniel exhaled shakily. His fingers curled into fists. "They did something to me," he admitted. "Back on that ship." Zira's heart dropped. "What?" Daniel's glowing veins flared painfully bright. And then, his entire body spasmed violently. Zira barely had time to react before Daniel collapsed, convulsing. His body was overloading with energy. His DNA was breaking down. And this time, it wasn't stopping. The ultimate betrayal. The Eridani fighter ship raced through hyperspace, streaks of blue and white flashing past the windows. The hum of the engines was steady, but inside the cockpit, chaos was unfolding. Daniel lay on the floor, his body convulsing violently. His veins, once pulsing with controlled blue energy, now flared erratically, like a dying star on the brink of collapse. His breathing was ragged, his muscles tensed as if fighting an invisible force. Zira knelt beside him, her heart pounding. "Stay with me," she whispered. Daniel's fingers curled into a tight fist, his entire body arching upward before slamming back down. The glow beneath his skin flickered dangerously. Something was wrong. No, something was breaking inside him. Her hand shook as she turned to the Eridani pilot. "How far are we from the capital?" 5 minutes, he said, his voice tight with urgency. "We're already transmitting an emergency distress call." Zira nodded, then turned back to Daniel. She gripped his shoulders, her breath unsteady. "Daniel, listen to me," she pleaded. "You have to fight this." His glowing eyes snapped open, staring directly into hers. For a split second, she saw something different in his gaze. Not pain, not fear, but pure, uncontrolled power. His lips parted. His voice was layered, distorted, inhuman. Too late. A pulse of raw energy exploded from his body. The ship shuddered violently. Lights flickered. Control panels short-circuited. The Eridani pilot cursed as he struggled to keep the ship stable. Zira barely held on to Daniel, her own body lifted off the ground from the force of the energy surge. Daniel's entire form flickered, as if reality itself couldn't decide whether he was human, alien, or something in between. His skin shifted between solid flesh and pure glowing energy. Zara's breath caught in her throat. He was becoming unstable, and if they didn't do something fast, he would explode. A desperate gamble. The ship burst out of hyperspace, entering Eridani's orbit. The planet was a breathtaking view of lush forests, glowing cities, and twin golden moons. The Eridani capital spaceport was already prepared for them. Ships cleared the way. A team of royal medical specialists and high-ranking officials stood waiting on the landing platform. Zara barely waited for the ship to land before she rushed out with Daniel in her arms, her strength fueled by desperation. He was barely conscious, his body burning with unstable energy, but she refused to let him go. The royal medics tried to take him from her. She shoved them away. "I'll take him," she snapped. "He's my responsibility." The officials didn't argue. They led her into the royal medical chamber, a high-tech facility filled with shimmering blue healing pods and floating holographic diagnostics. The Eridani High Chancellor, an older alien with piercing silver eyes, stepped forward. "Princess Zara," he said gravely, "what have you brought to our world?" Zara turned to him, her voice firm. "I brought my husband." The High Chancellor's expression darkened. "No, you brought a weapon." Zara's hands tightened into fists. "He's not a weapon," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "He's a person." The High Chancellor ignored her, looking at the lead medic. "Can we contain him?" The medic hesitated. "Contain him? Maybe. Cure him? That's impossible." Zara's heart clenched. "No," she whispered. "There has to be a way." The High Chancellor sighed. "There is one way." He turned to her, his silver eyes cold as ice. "Kill him." The betrayal. Zara stepped back as if she had been slapped. "Kill him," she repeated, her voice hollow. The High Chancellor's gaze didn't waver. "If he loses control, his body will collapse. And when that happens, he will release enough energy to vaporize everything within a 100-mile radius." Zara's hands trembled. "No, there has to be another way." "There isn't," the Chancellor said simply. "If we don't stop him now, he will take millions of lives with him." The words slammed into her like a hammer. She turned to Daniel. His body twitched in the containment field, the blue light under his skin flashing wildly. His expression was pained, his breath ragged. But then, his fingers twitched. Zara's breath caught. He was still fighting. She turned back to the Chancellor, her rage boiling over. "You're asking me to kill my husband." The Chancellor didn't blink. "I'm asking you to choose your planet over one dying soldier." Zara's heart raced. Could she do it? Could she end Daniel's life, even if it meant saving her people? She reached for the weapon they had handed her. Her hands shook violently as she raised it. She looked at Daniel. His eyes were barely open, but he was watching her. And he smiled, as if he already knew what she would choose. Zara's hands trembled. Her mind screamed at her to pull the trigger. Then, in the silence, Daniel's voice broke through. Soft, weak, but certain. "I trust you." Zara froze. And in that moment, she made her choice. She ***, spun on her heel, ***, and fired. Not at Daniel. At the High Chancellor. The plasma bolt struck his shoulder, sending him crashing backward. Gasps of shock filled the chamber. Zara pointed her weapon at the medics. "Step away from him." No one moved. Daniel shifted slightly, his body still weak, but his lips curved into a small smirk. "You just declared war," the Chancellor hissed. Zara's expression was fierce, unyielding. "No," she said. "I just saved my husband." She turned to the control panel and slammed the override button. The containment field around Daniel dropped. Zara rushed forward, placing her hands on his face. His skin was hot, his veins still flickering dangerously. "I won't let them take you," she whispered. Daniel's weak fingers grazed hers. Then, with the last of his strength, he whispered, "Then run." The door burst open as guards stormed inside. Zira grabbed Daniel's arm, lifted him up, and ran. The final battle and the truth about Daniel. The halls of the Eridani capital palace echoed with chaos. The sound of running footsteps, the hum of energy shields being raised, the roar of distant explosions, all signaled the beginning of an irreversible conflict. Zira had made her choice. She had fired on the High Chancellor to protect Daniel, and now there was no turning back. They ran. Zira held Daniel close, his body trembling against hers. His skin was still burning with unstable energy, his veins flickering between glowing blue and dull gray like a fading light. He was not fully himself anymore. He had been too far pushed, too far altered by the black market scientists, the people who had created him. But this wasn't just about survival. This was about love. As they sprinted through the corridors, guards and Eridani soldiers flooded the palace, their weapons raised. Zira barely had time to think, her heart racing. She couldn't let them capture him. Not after everything. "Zira, we have to get to the surface," Daniel gasped, his voice strained. His glowing eyes were sharp, his expression tense. "The ship's waiting. We have to leave Eridani. Now." She nodded. There was no more time to waste. But before they could reach the exit, a powerful energy blast hit the wall next to them, throwing them both to the ground. Zira's head spun, and for a moment, the world went dark. When she opened her eyes, she saw soldiers closing in. There was no escape from this. "Zira, go," Daniel shouted, pushing her forward with what little strength he had left. "I'll hold them off." "No," Zira screamed, her eyes burning with determination. "We leave together, or not at all." Daniel's eyes flickered. "It's too late for me. You have to survive. You have to live." Zira could hear the desperation in his voice. His glow was flickering wildly now, his body breaking down faster than she had realized. "Daniel, I'm not leaving you," she cried. "I won't abandon you." But Daniel grabbed her wrist with his last ounce of strength, his grip bone-crushing, and looked her in the eyes. "I love you, Zira." With those words, the last of his humanity seemed to slip away. The final truth about Daniel. And then, Daniel collapsed, his body shuddering violently, the blue glow flaring out of control. A deafening crack echoed in the air, and the palace itself seemed to shake. It was as if the very core of Daniel's existence was failing. His power was too much to contain, too unstable to control. Zira fell to her knees beside him, her hands shaking as she cradled his face. "Daniel, please, you have to hold on." But his body convulsed violently, as if the very fabric of his DNA was tearing apart. The blue energy that had once made him so powerful was now his undoing. His breathing became erratic, his skin sizzling with electric energy. Then, Daniel opened his eyes one last time. They were no longer just glowing. They were pure white, and for a moment, Zira saw the true essence of who he had always been. Not a soldier, not a weapon, but a man. A man who had been forced to live in a world that never saw him as human. He smiled faintly. "Zira, I've never known peace until I met you. You saved me." Tears welled up in her eyes as she held him. "I'll never leave you, Daniel. We'll make it through this. We'll fix it." But the glow in his eyes dimmed, and his chest stilled. His body flickered, human for a split second, then alien again, before it finally settled. Zira's heart stopped as the realization hit her. Daniel was gone. But he was still here. The truth about Daniel wasn't just his past. It was the power he had always contained, the power to change, to love, to evolve beyond the constraints of the world that had created him. And in that moment, Zira understood something. Daniel had always been human. Even if the world didn't see it, Even if he had been created in a lab, he was a man who had fought for his own freedom, who had loved beyond boundaries, who had made her his reason for living. The love they shared was the only thing that would remain. Zira kissed him, her lips trembling against his cooling skin. She whispered, "I love you, Daniel. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." But the battle was not over. As Daniel's body fell silent, the high-pitched whir of Eridani ships filled the sky. The entire capital was under siege. The palace was crumbling, and the soldiers were closing in. But Zira wasn't going to let them take this victory. Not when everything had cost them this much. The last stand. Zira stood up, her heart heavy, but her spirit unbroken. She felt a burning fire inside her. The same fire that had made her stand up to the High Chancellor. The same fire that had kept her going when everything else seemed to fall apart. She turned to the control panel. The emergency override button was still intact. With one final glance at Daniel's body, she slammed the button, activating the escape pods. And then she ran. Through the corridors, past soldiers who were too stunned to catch her, she made her way to the firing bay. The escape pod door opened before her, and she climbed inside. The hatch closed, and she was lifted off the ground, the ship breaking free from the capital's atmosphere. As she looked back one last time, the palace was a smoldering ruin in the distance. The Eridani capital was lost. But she had survived, and Daniel's sacrifice would never be forgotten. A new beginning. Zira sat in the cockpit, staring out at the stars, her fingers tracing the glass as if she could still feel him. She had lost him, but she hadn't lost everything. She hadn't lost the love they shared, the future they had built. As the stars stretched ahead of her, she whispered softly, "We're not done yet, Daniel. I'll carry your spirit with me, always." And with that promise, she set course for the unknown, the stars her only guide. She would never forget him. She would never stop fighting. And one day, she would make sure that the legacy of Project Genesis was truly over.